The February 6th monthly meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission is now called to order. The open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded by the commission staff and will be made public. My name is Mimi Love. I'm the chair of the BCDC. I'm joined by my co-chair, Linda Easley, and the rest of the commissioners. Over 30 years ago, the commission was established to ensure that the architecture and urban design of new projects in the city of Boston would have an positive impact on the public realm. We'd like to thank our fellow commissioners for donating their time, sharing their valuable insights, and shaping the city of Boston into a more beautiful, sustainable, and equitable place for all of its citizens. Commissioners, please say present as I call your name and take attendance. Amy Chambers. Linda Easley.
Present.
Jonathan Evans.
Present.
Diana Fernandez. Shauna Gillis-Smith.
Present.
David Hassin.
Present.
Mick Young Kim. Kathy Kotorides. Anne Marie Lubenow.
Present.
David Manfredi.
Present.
Catherine Morris.
Present.
Bill Ron. Bill, I believe
sorry,
you're with
present.
us. All
Bill
right.
Ross, present.
Thanks, Bill. Laura Solano.
Present.
Kirk Sykes.
Present.
And myself, Mimi Love. All right, moving on to meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes for the January 2nd monthly meeting, the January 16th design committee meeting, and the January 23rd monthly meeting?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Linda Easley.
Aye.
Jonathan Evans.
Aye.
Shauna Gillis-Smith.
Aye.
David Hassin.
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow.
Aye.
David Manfredi.
Aye.
Great. Catherine Morris.
Aye.
Bill Ron.
Aye.
Laura Solano.
Aye.
Kirk Sykes.
Aye.
And myself, Mimi Love. So the minutes have been approved for the January meetings. And with that, we move on to report from design committee, or from a report from review committee. I'll hand it off to Christina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the purpose of trying to condense the time that I'm talking here, I would like to read out the report for all of the projects, and then perhaps if it suits you, you could take the vote for all projects together at the end. Great. So per the regulations of Article 28 of the Boston Zoning Code, BPDA staff recommend the following proposed projects to BCDC for consideration. First, 290 Tremont Street, parcel P12C in Chinatown. A proposed project at this location contemplates a mixed-use development consisting of 151,200 square feet of income-restricted residential use and 2,500 square feet of ground floor commercial use. The proposed project site is owned by the BRA and was the subject of a public disposition process, which resulted in a tentative designation award to Asian CDC on September 14th, 2023. A PNF was filed on November 30th, 2023, and BPDA staff hosted a public meeting later that year. The proposed project was first introduced to this commission on January 2nd, 2024. The project was remanded to further review a design subcommittee meeting for further discussion of landscape elements. At a meeting of the design subcommittee on January 16th, 2024, committee members were generally supportive of the resolution of landscape elements and recommended the proposed project for consideration at full commission. Second, 22 through 24 Pratt Street in Allston. A proposed project at this location contemplates the development of approximately 311,000 square feet of residential use, or approximately 316 residential units. and approximately 92 garage parking spaces on a 2.21 acre site. A PNF was filed on September 12th, 2023, and BPDA staff hosted a public meeting on November 6th, 2023. This would be the first presentation of this proposed project to this commission. Third, 295 West 1st Street in South Boston. A proposed project at this location contemplates a mixed-use development consisting of 215,400 square feet of residential use, or approximately 252 residential units, 9,200 square feet of ground floor commercial use, and approximately 125 parking spaces on a 1.46 acre site. A PNF was filed on December 21st, 2023, and BPDA staff hosted a public meeting on January 31st, 2024. This would be the first presentation of this proposed project to the commission. And finally, 250 Everett Street in Brighton. A proposed project at this location contemplates development of approximately 250,000 square feet of residential use, or approximately 240 residential units, and approximately 120 garage parking spaces on a 1.82 acre site. A PNF was filed on January 5th, 2024, and BPDA staff hosted a public meeting on January 30th, 2024. This would also be the first presentation of this proposed project to BCDC. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Commissioners, do I have a motion to approve projects that were described by Christina?
Motion to review, yes.
A second?
A second.
Second.
Great. All those in favor say aye. Linda Easley,
Aye.
Jonathan Evans,
Aye.
Shauna Gillis-Smith,
Aye.
David Hassin,
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Aye.
David Manfredi,
Aye.
Catherine Morris,
Aye.
Bill Ron,
Aye.
Laura Solano,
Aye.
Kirk Sykes,
Aye.
and myself, Mimi Love, and appreciate that we got to do all of that in one vote. And I will just note that I believe Amy Chambers and Diana Fernandez have joined us, so they are present as well. All right, so moving on to the report from Design Committee.
That was what we, oh, sorry. So you mean the
To the
first
presentation,
I'm
yes.
sorry, excuse me. Thank you.
I'm recused from this. I'll be signing off now.
Thanks, Kurt. And while the proponent is getting ready to present, I'll just note that Kathy Kotoridis has joined us as well. And maybe Christine, I should just say, are we having a presentation from staff before the proponent?
No, not
No,
for
not
this
for okay.
project. So at this time, we would like to invite the proponent team to give their presentation. Please limit your presentation length to 10 minutes. We are happy to let you know when you've hit the 5 and 2 minute mark.
Good evening, everyone. This is Erin Hodges from Stantec Architecture. I am here with Cesare Casella from Ground, who is our landscape architect, and our development client, Peter Malcolm-Beck, is here to answer any questions as well if it comes up. So this is a review of our subcommittee design updates for 290 Tremont Street, parcel T12C. The front page is the view of the building from Tremont Street, right across from the Elliott Norton Park. Just a quick review of the program. We are a 96 unit rental, 36 unit condo, 100% affordable housing project. And we are, the last time at the full commission meeting, everyone was generally in favor of the architectural design, the massing, but had one request to look at the corner of the building to open up some views. So we will review that at the end of our presentation. Cesare, if you can go to the next page. think majority of our presentation you'll see today will be on the landscape review and the updates from your comments from subcommittee. So this is the concept we're using for the overall project, and I'm happy to report that we have embraced this concept in the form of a meandering path now in the landscape design as well, and everything is tying together as a very cohesive narrative in all. So Cesare, at this point, if you want to take over and walk us through.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I had the other person in the office speaking, so I forgot. Good evening. Thank you, Aaron, and good evening, Commissioner. We are very excited tonight to share the progress of the landscape design with you that were based on your suggestion. And for this reason, I want to do a quick recap of what we heard in the previous two meetings. In the first meeting, we received a number of useful indications, such as reduce the impact of the truck turning in this open space, explain the landscape programs that were going on in the open space, show a direct connection to Washington Street, clarify how the landscape design fit into the overall concept, enhance the character of this internal street and the pedestrian experience, and show some sun and shade condition. We addressed all these comments and we received positive reaction during the subcommittee meeting, plus some more comments. In particular, we are asked to adjust the paving pattern at the community room where the outdoor seating area is, add some potential pedestrian crossing at the end of the driveway, consider opportunity to access the lawns from the path, add some level of screening to the parking lot, and consider modifying the shape of and size of the seating area along the path. The first big move that we did was to reduce the amount of space needed by the truck movement in this area. And you can see in blue, this is the previous curb layout, and in orange is the current curb layout. So we not only were able to increase the amount of open space, but also to make it contiguous. And this allowed us to have more space and have the right space to address also all the rest of your comments and to make a nicer landscape project. This is the current landscape plan with some notes describing the programs. I want to first say that this is going to be a private open space for public use, and I'm going to walk through it starting from Tremont Street on the west side. So we improved the streetscape by creating a large furnishing zone with trees and a large pedestrian zone, a pull-out area on the north side, and a crosswalk on the south side to connect with the existing park. At this corner of the building where the commercial space is, we made the streetscape a little bit larger. And by shifting these three existing trees, it's also helped us for some utility that are running underneath. And where this commercial space is at the corner of the building, we wrap this corner with the trees and the paving in order to suggest the presence of a public connection running along this internal street to invite people in. At the end of this streetscape experience, we find this small park that has three components. This area here outside the community room, that is mainly hardscape, and this is meant to be like a space to welcome these pill-out activity that are happening inside the community room. And then two lawn, an upper lawn and a lower lawn. These three spaces are connected by this winding path that is ending here, where currently there is an existing stairs based on the current grading condition. We are removing these stairs and we are sloping down less than 5% in order to create a universal, an accessible connection from Tremont to Washington Street and vice versa. In this box highlighted in blue, there is what we are proposing as a potential connection to Washington Street, but it is outside our poverty line, our poverty area. So this is like contingent to the ongoing dialogue and coordination that we are having with the with the owner of the hotel.
I'd like to let the proponent team know that they've reached the halfway point.
Okay, thank you. So for the community room, we are thinking about flexible seatings for a number of activities. The upper lawn is closer to this area, so will be used mainly by the community room for we're imagining children play, seating, tai chi, ping pong table. Along the path, there are some seating pockets to locate chess tables. The lower lawn, because of the different grading, there will be some seating, step seating, and we're imagining here some outdoor classroom, more performance, outdoor dancing, and lunch opportunity. In this view, you have a sense of this spatial sequence within these three spaces. That is also evocative of the concept of the poem, of the concept of discovery, going from Tremont to Washington Street and the other way around. These comments are highlighting the most recent changes based on the comment that we received during the subcommittee, and so we adjust the paving here to make it more coordinated with the rest of the design. We added a pedestrian crossing along the desired line going towards Tremont Street. We enlarged this seating pocket to add an additional chess table, and we also open the lawn from the path in this location. And we increased the amount of green buffer around this lawn. We also looked at the possibility of changing the size of this seating pocket and opening this lower lawn from the path. But because of the grading changes that we are doing, we didn't think it was the best idea, because it was some awkward moment because of it was basically just hard to accomplish. This is a view from the lower lawn, and we see the seating step looking at the lower lawn and the upper lawn behind this curve and the community area at the bottom. The lighting is also an opportunity for us to pick up on the colors of the building, and you see on the side some opportunity for art. This is the view from the community room looking down. And in this location, we increased the green buffer here, but we didn't want to stop completely the view looking at Washington Street, so that so that it was obvious that this connection exists. This is the last view, and in this last view, you see how these three spaces are connected by this sort of exploratory path of discovery between the spaces. And I can now hand over to Aaron for the last slide.
Thanks, Cesare. So to close up, here are some view studies of what happens if we cut the building back 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, and what's the impact on view access from the Tremont Street to the central green space that we have. And as you can see in the diagram, the positive impact of opening that corner up all the way for the height of the building does sacrifices quite a bit of the unit layout and the floor efficiency. The two diagram on the right, the top one shows the previous design and current design actually, and the bottom one shows the impact of having to move a unit to the top right corner of the floor plan. And unfortunately, it's gonna end up taking up that really nice outdoor space that we have created connecting the indoor community space. So instead of taking the corner back the whole height, what we are proposing as an alternative, Cesare, if you could go to the next page, is cutting the building back at the lower 2 floors. The image on the left shows what we had previously proposed, and the image on the right is showing the ground floor community commercial space being cut back, as well as the second floor 2-bedroom unit being reduced down to a 1-bedroom. And what this does for the building corner is it really lightened up quite a bit, cantilevering everything on top, but opened up that view corridor for the pedestrian scale. As you come across the street on Tremont, you get a little bit more view around the corner. So that was a positive change, and I hope everybody see it as a positive change here. And with that, I think that concludes our presentation. we're open for any questions or comments.
Thanks, Erin. Just as a reminder, commissioners, Commissioner Gillis-Smith and Commissioner Sykes have recused themselves, and we've had Mick Young Kim join us. So those who were at the last design committee meeting, raise your hand if you have comments, and we welcome any comments from any of the commissioners as well. All right, so Linda Easley.
Thank you, Mimi, and thanks for the presentation, Cesare and Erin. I was at the last design committee, and I'll start with the building. I know, Erin, we had asked your team to think about really pulling that corner of the building back, and the idea was to connect to the park across the street, which the current view shows really well, and we appreciated you testing that. The compelling thing for me in subcommittee was that as the proponent did pull that building back in their kind of tests, it did not reveal the park as we had thought it might. And so the changes that I think Erin and her team have proposed are a really nice response, I think, to some of the concerns about both pedestrian connection and also the idea that this building will very much be a landmark in its existing position. So I appreciate that and really support the design move there. And then in terms of the landscape, Cesare, thanks for your presentation. What I really appreciated this time, and it was helped by those perspective sketches, is that now we've really created kind of two lobes of lawn, two lawn lobes, and that they're separated by topography. And even though it's a really small urban open space, I think it is going to be a gem. The way that you've screened the parking in the adjacent lot and brought that metaphor of the winding path into the landscape, I think it just functions really well. And thank you for taking another look at how you might add a desire line to allow pedestrians to cross to the building side of the street as well. Great project.
Thanks, Linda. Laura Solano.
I was also at the last two meetings. If we could go to a site plan, please. That's great. Thank you. One of the things I'm really happy with is I think that the amount of spaces that have been given over to community upper lawn and lower lawn are ample enough to really hold a number of people at the same time. One thing, Cesare, I always wanted to ask you about, but we've been talking about so many different things, is I know that you are getting rid of the stairs that are going down to the hotel. I'm curious how the grades work against the existing garage and what you have to do in that location. Are they even with it? Is there a drop or a rise?
So, Alar, thank you for your question. So, in this location here, there is a ramp, like a vehicular ramp that is entering the garage that is pretty steep.
Yep.
And there is a wall that is basically hiding this ramp from this area. And then it's going, and then I don't remember exactly what's going on where the garage is, but I think the grade at some point becomes the same, but it's not really accessible. And what we are doing here, we are proposing a fence with some green buffer along it that actually extends. If I show you this view, so you see this, there's a fence and a green buffer that is extending from our building up to Washington Street. And on this, in the ramp that I was describing is here in this initial part.
Thank you. That's really clear, and I think that sort of solves a concern that I had about potential grade drops there. The only thing I'll say is I think as you start to move into the design is to look at the sun-shade diagram to make sure that those two lawns have enough shade at some time during the day, so that they can be occupied all the time. But that's, that's a refinement that I think you'll continue to look at. And it seems like you've sort of positioned things where you could amply add any trees that might be needed for that. So other than that, I have no more comments, and thank you very much for your team's responsiveness to this.
Thanks, Laura. David Manfredi.
Want to say, I think architecture and landscape, you've both done a marvelous job transforming what is kind of a dreary corner in the city right now, resolving a series of difficult geometries. And I think it will change this part of Tremont Street. And I hope someone is here when we review a building in future years for that parking lot site, and to make sure that a view from the east is preserved into this, from Washington is preserved into this gem of a park in the middle of a block. And that should be part of the constraints of public realm development for that site. But thank you very much. This is really a really nice project.
Thanks, David. Commissioners, any more comments? Oh, Kathy Caritas. I believe you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. This is, I believe, the first time I'm actually seeing this, and I too want to compliment you on the design and the filling in of this space. Not to mention, I hope you stick with the colors, or at least something in these tones, because this is a neighborhood that really does need more warmth and amongst its buildings. And I think this is potentially a very nice harbinger of that. I'm curious, I perhaps you said this, but I'm not certain of what the potential connection to Washington Street is, the blue boxed area. And if you said it in this meeting, I'm sorry if I missed it, but I haven't seen it before. Is that tentative or forthcoming?
Yes, this is Peter Munkenbeck speaking on behalf of the owner. The blue box and everything north of it, Plan North is actually north. That whole area, including the parking lot, belongs to the DoubleTree Hotel owner. We are in active discussions. The discussions are positive. We haven't completed the process yet, but there's two parts to it. One part is redefining the easement that the hotel currently benefits from, that's required in order to locate the building where it is, and then also improving the area that within the blue box. Our hope is, and our expectation is, that because he has a stated plan to develop the rest of the parking lot, as David Manfredi was referring to, as a multi-story building, that he will have sufficient interest in remaining in the good graces of the public authorities, that we will be able to reach a satisfactory arrangement.
Got it. That's very helpful. Thank you. I do hope it comes to fruition. It's a very nice flow, and I appreciate the design of the park and the open space areas. I do wonder, I know at this stage you aren't thinking necessarily at this level of detail, but what the 24-hour activity and particularly lighting around this park will in fact be, given that it's really the public realm that we're really keeping an eye on here.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to pass it on to Catherine Morris.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening. So I was at the very first meeting, so a lot has changed since then. So I definitely want to compliment the team on the changes. I do have a question because I wasn't at the second meeting, but this kind of turnaround nook, is that to accommodate a car or a truck? Just wanted to get some clarity.
The neighbor who has the benefit of the easement and will have the benefit of the revised easement services, his refuse goes into the very faintly shown rectangle there up against his there. Thank you. That rectangle is where he has his dumpster and compactor. And so the truck will pull in off of Tremont, go straight up into the end across the crosswalk there. And then it will do a little bit of a modest S curve to back up against that dumpster. And then when it leaves, it will pull back across the little crosswalk again. And then it will put its rear along the side of the building where the narrow pavement is, and then it will pull out frontwards.
So is it to assume that the truck will actually back down versus pulling in?
No, the truck will pull in,
Okay.
go across the crosswalk, then back just as far as the dumpster, then pull into the crosswalk again and do a 3-point turn and go out facing frontwards.
Okay. That's the only question I had. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands being raised. So I think you got a lot of great feedback from the commissioners. It really is a difficult site, what you're left with given the existing conditions. It's almost a residual site that you really worked your magic, and that connection from Washington Street to Tremont Street and having, you know, the park as that hidden gem in the middle of the block is really a terrific solution. I think, you know, we really, I especially appreciate that you worked with the neighbors in design committee. I know there were some comments about that not being your site, but I think that would be a terrific outcome if that does come to fruition. Since I'm not seeing any other hands, maybe we just ask for public comments.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise their digital hand using the instructions presented on the screen. Please keep comments to 2 minutes. Commissioner Love, at this time, I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Well, then I would love to make a motion to, I think this is a terrific project, by the way. And I would like to make a motion to approve.
Second.
Great. And with that, I'm going to call on all commissioners. Linda Easley,
Yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
David Hassin,
Yes.
McYoung Kim,
I'm going to recuse myself since I never saw this project before and I came in late, so my apologies to the team.
noted. Kathy Koderitis,
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Yes.
David Manfredi,
Yes.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Bill Ron. I believe you're muted, Bill, and I know you were having technical difficulty, but it looks like you're back with
We
us.
are having severe technical difficulties here, which we hope to solve. Yes.
I appreciate you hanging in there. Laura Solano
Yes.
and myself, Mimi Love. Yes. Congratulations, team. We really look forward to you enlivening Tremont Street and making this through connection.
Thank you
Thanks
so much,
very
everyone.
much for a very efficient and helpful process.
Great.
Thank you.
Hey, Mimi,
Right.
I'm not able to raise my hand either. I don't know what kind of technical difficulties, Bill, you're having, but
Physical hands are work as well. If you want to
Okay.
raise your hand, I'll look
No,
out for that as
I'm
well.
not doing it right now.
No.
Okay,
So-
perfect. Do you go into reactions? It's always worked for me before.
Yes. Under,
Yes.
But if you've updated Zoom recently, McYoung, even if you wave your hand in the screen, it usually will put your hand up for you. So
Oh, really?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Let me try it.
And-
Nope.
So under reactions, it's not at the top, it's at the bottom. It just says raise hands. It is kind of broken out separately, on at least on my Zoom.
Somehow I don't have that, but
Okay, well,
just
I will
use
look
a
out for
manual
hands.
hand.
All right. So Christine, I think we're on to new projects.
And Mimi and Christina, I just wanted to make one quick comment as we get into these 3 projects, if I could.
Please.
Yes, please.
And that is that, and as a commission, we have wanted to see some of these new projects a little earlier in their process. We've been talking about that for probably a year plus. So tonight, we're actually seeing projects very early on in their review process. And I'm actually kind of looking forward to being able to have comments a little bit earlier. And we'll hopefully get some good feedback to the proponent teams. But I just wanted to raise that with the group.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Great. So we are going to advance to the first of those projects, 22 through 24 Pratt Street in Alston. You'll first receive a presentation of planning context given by BCDC ex officio member and Director of Planning, Amy Chambers, then a presentation of the proposed project itself given by the proponent team, and then a summary of design review feedback shared with the proponent team given to date by BPDA staff member Jong Jun-ju. So we'll start with the Director of Planning.
Commissioners, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize for being off screen. I'm actually en route to a public meeting. So I just wanted to also make the note that I'll be logging off early tonight, but one of my staff, Ted Schwartzberg, will be joining to present for the additional projects. This project, 22 to 24 Pratt Street in Alston, is one that the zoning compliance staff have reviewed. From a zoning context perspective, the site is unique in that it is buffered by surrounding context primarily being the highway. The majority of the proposed project does fall within a local industrial subdistrict, the Linden Street subdistrict, while one of the parcels involved is in a 2F, that's a two-family subdistrict. Next slide, please. And there are no recent land use plans in serving this particular area. This is a historically industrial district served by adjacent rail. Staff have made a few notes with regard to the Alston Brighton needs assessment, which specifically meant to identify goals for future projects and will dovetail into an Alston Brighton neighborhood plan, which staff are kicking off shortly. In addition, they have identified the Beacon Park Yards Regional Framework Plan, which is an ongoing initiative, and Housing a Changing City, which broadly speaks to goals related to housing production. Jumping back to the last slide, apologies, Christina, but just very quickly, I did want to draw your attention to a number of areas where staff have just done assessment. We hope that these charts on a forward-moving basis will just help to provide a little bit of context with regard to how the project does relate to the zoning code itself. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Chambers. At this time, we would ask that the proponent team give their project presentation. Please keep your presentation to 10 minutes, and we will give you a 5- and 2-minute warning.
Great. Hello, happy to see you all. My name is Tamara Roy, and I'm a principal at Stantec. And with me are BK Boley, also from Stantec, and Rob Adams from Halverson Design, as well as Matt McCullum and Sean Sachs from Hines Residential. We're going to briefly review this project. So we have actually had some extensive meetings with the BPDA and also with an IAG, public meetings, also Chamber of Commerce meetings, and they've all gone really well. And I think mostly it was because they were welcoming of a lot of the housing and especially the high number of IDP units and affordable units in the neighborhood. And particularly the one with Councillor Breeden was wonderful, where she just said, I would love to see this much green space in a neighborhood where there's almost none. So the site is at the edge of, and it's, as the woman before said, it's kind of a buffered on one side by the Alston Green permitted project, but it's in the kind of traditional Alston neighborhood. And then to our north, a whole bunch of infrastructure, which has a lot of future possibilities to it, as many of you may know. And then it also exists in this sort of line of post-industrial development along the Mass Pike, where there's quite a bit of height going in. We have about a 2.2 acre site.
Good evening, commissioners. We also wanted to just give you a brief history of some of the master plan that's taken place here. Many of you know this project because during the permitting of Alston Green, the BCDC asked the proposer and their architectural team to envision what would be happening behind the Alston Green project, because you were asking for certain connections to go through to a possible development in that location. So that image on the bottom is what they showed you. Then there was another pre-development study that continued this notion of a bar building running along the railroad tracks, and then connections into triangular park areas. That development study was shown by a previous team to the BPDA, and they started scratching their heads and then took out their pencils. And Mike Canizzo, Matt Martin, and Jejung came up with this concept diagram of how the massing could be pulled away and up from Pratt Street and Linden Street, how you could create green spaces that would be real destinations for those connections through, and then how the massing could be broken into various building kind of forms and height so that it all wouldn't be the same. When we joined the team, we looked at these, we studied them, and we thought, wow, that BPDA concept is a great example of landscape urbanism, creating destination green spaces for the larger community first, reducing the amount of asphalt, trying to kind of pull everything back and away, and creating real usable connections. So the next slide shows you where we are today, and we have a scheme that, as you saw in the previous slides, at 800 square feet per unit of usable open space, we are at 67% of the total site is open space, only 33% lot coverage. Of that open space, we have 47% that is passive open space and then planted buffers. We've been working to reduce the amount of asphalt even further. We do need, we think, a small turnaround for deliveries and for cars to move around, and then they have to drop down and around into a completely underground parking garage on the right-hand side. Rob Adams will take you through a little more detail on the open space in a minute, but Tamara wants to go through some of our architectural ideas and how we've arrived at where we are.
I do want to mention that one of the things, this cul-de-sac was actually really responded to very positively by the neighborhood, because they said a lot of other projects end up, doing curbside drop-off, and they really liked the fact that it was off-site so that it's not adding more vehicles on Pratt Street, because it is a somewhat quiet residential street. So we did take a look at the different permitted projects in the neighborhood, and also the Alston Green character, of which we saw all of the meetings with the BCDC and how they really asked them to warm up the materials to these warm bricks, red and brown, and the soft green colors and wood, and a decent amount of color as well on the left. And then also looked at that line of buildings that are happening along I-90 and their sort of more modern expression. And I think we came to the conclusion that we wanted to be kind of transitional. We want to harken back a little bit to the warehouse that's on the site, but looking at some sort of more modern uses of brick and masonry, and as BK said, sort of sculpting the building so that it has lower wings as it gets next to its neighbors, taller piece in the center where it's sort of the farthest away from everybody, and also this great little gap. That's our amenity space. So this is the massing and the design as it stands. So we've got 8-story pieces on either side. I'm sorry, 7 stories. And then a larger building in the center. We're using a mixture of materials of light and darker masonry, and then also a dark metal panel to hint at some of those more warehouse type qualities. And then lots of brick detailing at the base. And you can see our stats here. We have, as I said, like the response was, wow, it's amazing to get 300 units on this site, but still have that incredible amount of open space, as well as 15% affordable units. This is the view from the Pike side. There's also a lot of railroad tracks and Cambridge Street. So it really is a thickening of the infrastructure there. And almost all of our shadows fall in that direction, which is a nice coincidence of having this site facing the orientation it has. Very high sustainability goals of all electric and passive house. I won't go through this whole list, but there were some really big positives in here about the sustainability story. And now I'm going to pass it to Rob Adams from Halverson.
Thanks, Tamara. I think Tamara mentioned one of the biggest moves, or the best move or opportunity that we had, was to push the building, or Stantec had, was to push the building up towards the north, which really allows that southern edge full sun exposure, which is a pretty unique opportunity within the city. So this project does a lot of things. I think it does three things really well. We'll touch on those three things and then show some character images following. But as Tamara and BK mentioned, the access from Pratt Street, both from a bike and ped and vehicular point of view, is very clear and efficient, and provides what we think is a good amount of, as Tamara said, public drop-off along that 9 to 12 o'clock on the loop drive. It has public sidewalks on both sides, room for blue bike station, as well as a small parklet that we'll see some imagery of just off the back of Pratt Street sidewalk, to really create what we think is an inviting entry sequence from Pratt Street to the project. The other thing it does in the world of making something good out of a less than pleasant potential solution is we do need fire truck access from the drop off to the northwest corner of the site. And so in the idea of doing good, we utilize that path to do two things. One, it provides a clear definition of kind of ground floor tenant amenity spaces versus the public realm to the south of that. And so obviously creating that clear definition of what's tenant and resident based versus open to the public. What it also does is makes this wonderful connection on a much larger scale to what's being labeled as the People's Path along the north side of the property, the future multimodal connection that runs along the project as part of the Alston Yards project. And so that fire lane really becomes that kind of entry point from our project site, but also a larger connection to the community. And then the last thing, and I'll steal Linda's term, but the word gem, like the open space, the public realm that's created is, again, mainly to our southern exposure, is this great little neighborhood gem with some simple programming of passive lawn, a small dog run, and then also allows us to do a lot of, I'll say, really good work around stormwater management in the area.
I'd like to let the proponent team know that there's a little bit less than halfway.
Yep. Next tomorrow, please. Thanks. And so within that gem, right, the opportunity to create some, I'll just say, real strong texture, looking at shingle oak, white oaks, some seasonal plantings, evergreens, again, trying to enhance that gem-like quality of this open space. And then obviously simple programming, right? This is a nice small neighborhood open space, passive lawn, dog park that we talked about. Next tomorrow. And so it's just some real quick images. So this is the entry sequence from Pratt Street. You can see the small, what we'll call pocket park off the back of the sidewalk, the entry drive, the blue bike station, but the overall kind of civic and public feeling to this entry drive, which is ultimately the first kind of gateway to the open space. Next tomorrow. And then I think we'll end on this. This is essentially in a drone above the turnaround loop drive. And so you can see then looking to the northwest, the ground floor tenant spaces up against the building, the fire lane / multimodal connection back to the People's Pike, providing that nice definition, and then the public realm open space to the left. And I think it's important to note our firm is also working on Alston Green, and so understand the grades, able to make those connections in the future to those open spaces that BK talked about originally.
Just going to point here because there's definitely thoughts about being able to make that connection easily enough.
Yeah. You know, obviously based on timing, we won't preclude those connections to be made and look forward to those opportunities for those connections to be made.
And I think since we do have a teeny bit more time, since we were more efficient than our 10 minutes, I just want to point out that we do have some transformers at the entrance, which we are screening here and have worked with the BPDA on. And partly that is because it's an all-electric building of a decent size. And so we do need to have those pieces of infrastructure. It is much less expensive, as most architects on this call would know, to put them outside rather than in. And we've chosen to take this area here and make it our premier bike room. And that's sort of the point, rather than having a big vault for an expensive vault for transformers inside the building. So our ground floor is sort of service on the right, the bike room, the amenities and lobbies all around the front, and then some units on this wing. So I think that does it for us.
Thanks, Tamara. I'd like to ask that June from BPDA Urban Design go ahead and get the design review feedback, a summary of that shared with the proponent team to date before deliberation.
Good evening. This is Jung Junju, BPDA Urban Design staff. Again, this project is situated in a unique area undergoing transformation. The site is also tucked behind that approved Alston Green project, and also will face the I-90 reconstruction project across the railroad tracks. And what's more important is that the project is still on very much integral part of the existing residential neighborhood. Taking all this into account, BPDA staff have focused on the site plan design to ensure that the project continues to extend publicly accessible open space opportunities. With that, the bullet point here tonight highlight key areas for further consideration and development. The project's northern side needs careful design consideration for now and for the potential shared path. It's called People's Pike. And the main entryway, which is the key point, still is a key point, the main entryway of Pratt Street should be attractive, pedestrian-oriented with maybe trees on both sides, minimal and safe vehicular activity, and strong streetscape design that welcomes all the public and neighboring residents. Potentially, because of that reason, the potentially sizable transformers really need to be relocated and possibly inside the building. The project should provide seamless and accessible pedestrian paths through the Alston Green project, which indicate that kind of number 4. Oh. And next slide. And also, we need to make sure that the massing, height, and building design complement the strong public realm design at the ground level. Overall massing aligns well with the surrounding context, but the project should consider wind mitigation measures, including potentially massing adjustment, as the wind analysis in the PNF actually pointed to the 2 locations for additional test. One area is the between Alston Green building and the west wing, where that kind of bullet number 2 is located. And another location is the southwest corner of the 16-story building. Lastly, the elevations and materiality need for the refinement through continued design discussions. I'm sure that BCDC discussion will benefit all these areas. And thanks for this chance to share our thought tonight, and turning over to Christina.
Actually, Commissioner Love, I think we'll be turning it over to you for deliberation. Thank you.
All right, then. Thanks, June. Maybe if the proponent can put up an image, an overall image, and commissioners, you'd like to raise your hand, have any comments on the project as they're pulling up the slide.
But this one.
That's great. So let's start with Linda Eastley.
Thanks, Mimi. And thanks, Tamara and BK and Rob. You guys always do such a great job in delivering information, complicated information in a concise way. Really appreciate that. So I took a bunch of notes as you were presenting, and I think the one thing that struck me the most when we got the preview package was really the nature of this super block and the fact that the frame of the development is Linden and Pratt, and that you don't touch either street. You don't have frontage on either street, and so it makes it odd. It makes it odd for the Boston area, for Allston, and I think then it delivers a set of really unique challenges to this team. So I think in subcommittee, I'd like to understand a little bit about just how you've thought about the super block. And I think it's helpful, Rob, as you mentioned that you've also been involved in the Allston Green project. I think that opens up some opportunities for us. But a little bit of explanation about how you thought about the super block. And I also really appreciate this diagram, and also the one that June showed, that always gives us the context of Allston Green. And I think going forward, I'd love to have that context on all of your slides and diagrams. It just helps us to understand how the various component parts fit together. I'd also like to understand, as part of that kind of super block, what the opportunities are for maybe better connections back over to Linden Street. And there was a diagram, Rob, that you showed where we're looking at this fire lane. And it actually was on June's diagram. There was a number 4 over it. And I'm just wondering if there are some compelling ways that, as part of this full development, we can make some internal pedestrian streets that allow us to get all the way to Pratt, allow us to get all the way to Linden, in a way that just feels more legible. Right now, it feels like the developments are very disparate. And I think there's because this is such an unusual site, I think there's such amazing opportunity to do something really clever and unique and interesting with the urban fabric. So, so those connections, I think, to help break up the super block could be really helpful. And then the last comment I'll make in my kind of urban design theme is really to think carefully about the kind of narrow view that you have of your frontage, and understanding as you come along Pratt Street, what that aperture is, as you're looking into that circle drive, what greets you, what's at the end of that axis, and is there a way to kind of minimize the paving that would be the foyer of that axis, to kind of maybe bring that focal point, that building facade, a little bit closer to the street, or at least part of the fabric? And is there a way we can be thinking about that even in concordance with what's happening along Pratt Street? And the last question I had was about the People's Way. I think, Rob, that's the term you used. Just be curious to understand the section of that. Is there kind of a wall? Are there plantings? What is the experience of someone using that? And again, thinking about how it ties into the overall hierarchy of the pedestrian pathways through this full block. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Anne-Marie Lubinow.
Thank you. I'm going to build upon Linda's comments, and also I agree. I really appreciate the very succinct but effective presentation, the context you've provided. I guess a big question I have that I'd like to understand is, again, building upon Linda's, thinking of this as a framework of a super block, how this project completes the whole. Again, this is a interesting opportunity to create a new district. I really appreciate the analysis and discovery of how can the situation of the new structure create a valuable new open space, but how could that feel like? I'd like to better understand the quality of the space itself. It feels a little bit more residual in the way it's currently defined than I think it could be. I also it also feels very one-sided. We're just looking at this building. So I'd really like to understand the relationships between the new structure and the other adjoining development that will front onto that green space. I like the idea of creating an entrance court, and how could it feel less like a cul-de-sac and more like an entry court? So what does that mean in terms of the configuration, adjacencies? I did notice when I looked at the drawings the presence of those transformers. So I'm a little less immediately concerned about whether they are inside the building or not, but it seems like if you are creating what effectively is a gateway to the housing, to this wonderful new green space, how can that entryway really feel like a gateway and feel more welcoming and connected, and not have transformers in that space? So again, how can we think of this new development as becoming more integrated, not only with the immediately adjoining new development, but also with the district as a whole? So I understand the district does not have a lot of green spaces, but I would like to understand how this green space fits into the broader context, because I think that will also inform some of the uses and some of the ways it is connected to the adjoining context. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. David Hassim.
So, thank you so much. First of all, again, very nice presentation. Nice to see you guys. I think that I'm pleased that I feel like the strategies that you're exploring in terms of the making of the green space and the scale of the project, which I feel actually very comfortable with, and I think that's important to say. I guess when you come to subcommittee, I mean, there's some larger questions about the nature of the block that probably would precede my question, but I would love to understand, first of all, some site sections would be, I think, very helpful to go through the landscape, from your development through to the permitted part of Alston Green, and for example, through the backyards of those houses that we see in the corner there. I think that would be helpful information for us to see. I'd also, I can recognize that you're trying to break this project down into elements that are going to feel comfortable with Alston Green and scaling down to a residential neighborhood. I'd love to hear more about the material strategy, how you're deploying what's dark brown and what's beige and the bays and so forth. Like what is the strategy that you are using as it wraps around the building, so that I can get into your head about the system and the logic about how those are, because right now it feels a little episodic to me, and I'm just trying to understand the overall thinking. And lastly, in terms of the comment about where the wind is and so forth, I do feel a little bit like the tower corner there, which was identified as being a particularly windy corner, is a really important place in this whole development. It's a place where the tower is kind of backing into your green space in a very significant way. And I'd be interested to know how you're thinking about addressing the wind condition there. And if in fact that is not, right now it feels like something backing in, and maybe it should feel more like a central focus, because the tower is really something that all of these lower buildings are gathering around. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the tower itself and how it presents itself in your green space. But I look forward to it, and I think it's a really exciting project.
Thanks, David. Shauna?
Thanks, Mimi. Rob, Tamara, BK, thank you very much for a clear presentation, as everyone has mentioned. From an open space perspective, first of all, I really want to applaud the project for the significant amount of open space. For me, one of the things, I want to echo David's comment about bringing sections to the subcommittee, because of the scale. I'm actually having a hard time really getting a sense of what the overall scale is of the open space. So from my perspective, it's really more, it could be overall site sections, but a number of sections through the open space to understand its character. I also, a couple things that I'd like to focus on at subcommittee is the public nature of the public part of the open space. I think the signal of having the pocket park along Pratt is a really nice idea, but then it sort of falls away. The transformers on one side, but more significantly, the buffer and the dog park. And I can understand the logic of that being at the entry because it would be well used by the community. But I think having more signals to understand that this really is a public amenity instead of a private, private park. And the other aspect that I would like to learn more about, and maybe picking up on Linda's idea of having a continuous connection, pedestrian connection through, is the nature of this fire road. I don't know if that's asphalt and pavers or what the patchwork strategy is from a material perspective, but also an intention perspective. And can that feel less like a divider and more like something into itself? But I look forward to seeing the project in subcommittee. Thank you.
Thanks, Shauna. Laura Solano?
Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to follow up on some of the things that Shauna has mentioned. I too am very happy that so much of the site has been dedicated to landscape and the possibilities that brings. As others have said, I would deeply like to understand what the condition is related to Alston Green, because in the city, sites aren't necessarily just their own footprint, but in fact, the way that they relate to adjacencies is really critical. I'm having a hard time with the fire lane, and that's because it still feels as if it's giving precedence to vehicles. And so you've been able to spirit away a lot of land, and yet it still feels, both of those spaces on either side of that still feel like they're lining the street. I'm not sure of the scale that I see. I've been trying to sort of figure out the width of the driveway to the drop off and the width of the that path. And so I don't know if that's greater than 20 feet. I think it also has to do with the materiality of it. And I'm wondering whether or not it has to be laid out as it's laid out, because it does have this unfortunate effect of kind of splitting the spaces in half so that neither side of that fire lane sort of gets anything in particular. As we go along, let's talk about various materials that you're showing. I think I saw AstroTurf in one of them. I'd also like to talk about the types of uses that are closer to the building versus across the fire lane, thinking about noise and aspect. I too don't like the electrical boxes at the entry. I think it takes away from something important that you all are trying to do. Let's see. Oh, the Pike side. We do need to see sections of that and understand it a little. And it's obvious from looking at the various perspectives that you're still thinking about that too, which is absolutely fine. But I do think if you're going to make the gesture to put so much land on the other side that you not dismiss the other side. And maybe that is also about looking at the future adjacencies and seeing the connections that can be made there. I think that does it. truly look forward to having more open discussions about this in the next meeting. So thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Laura. David Manfredi?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I think you've got great comments. And I'm gonna ask Rob, because you were involved in Alston Green in an important way, and I remember when we reviewed Alston Green thinking, boy, that's a tough site that is getting left behind, literally, figuratively. And I would like to see a ground plan, site development plan that shows the Alston Green buildings, this building, and the site improvements and how they relate to each other and how there might be more connection. You're responsible for all of it, Rob. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I know you've got different clients, but there's a huge opportunity there to think about the ground plane absent the property lines. I don't know, at least as a thought exercise, and maybe a way to make this feel more connected out to the public around the streets. I'll stop there.
Yep.
Thanks, David. Jonathan Evans?
Yeah, super quick. I appreciate everything that's been said so far, and maybe want to kind of go back to something David said just regarding just the buildings themselves, and would love to, as we get more into subcommittee, better understand more about what generated some of the geometries. I think I certainly appreciate how this building is a product of its constraints, and I like the overall scale of it, and the sort of, you know, mid-block to tower proportions kind of make sense. But again, just looking through how you got some of these sort of chamfers and projections and some of the other moves, that what is the logic behind them? You know, some of them don't feel quite locked in, and so just kind of understanding how that starts to kind of come to play. And I think that's all secondary to some of these larger questions with regards to kind of urban design and connecting to the local fabric. But I would love to understand more about how you kind of got to some of these massing gestures.
Thanks, Jonathan. Mick Young, I'm sorry. I see that you're raising your hand.
No, it
So-
was, I just did
Okay,
it a
all
second
right.
ago.
Hope I didn't miss you. And Kathy, I'll come back to you.
So I think my landscape colleagues covered a lot of the larger issues. I would love to see some options that you might have studied for the kind of the circulation of the design itself, of the drop off with the crosswalks. I do like the way in which you're starting to blur where you read the crosswalk and where the roadway is. But I just wonder if there were other studies about how that turnaround looks and what its relationship to this plaza is, and whether there's a little bit more blurring that could happen between those two things. That's it.
Thanks, Mick Young. Kathy Koderitis.
Yes, thank you. Great presentation. I would only add that I would love to better understand the approach to this site down Pratt Street. From this perspective, it looks one way and like a boulevard, and it feels to me like it may actually be a tighter set of circumstances, a very different type of a street, and it would be helpful just to understand what the experience will be given more cars approaching the site down a largely small residential street right now. Otherwise, I think everyone has covered the issues of context and better understanding the relationship to the neighborhood and the adjacent both developments and existing house sites.
Awesome. I will definitely second that. A lot of good comments, but I do have 3 comments that I just want to make. One is about the massing. I feel like there's a story and almost like you're bearing the lead. Like, I know you came to the massing because of X, Y, and Z, but I really would like to know that story as to why the tower is where it is, the low buildings are where they are, wide angles back. So if there's any urban design diagrams that you can share with us in subcommittee to describe why it ended up this way, I think it would be helpful, because I'm still very curious about why that turnaround circle doesn't really relate to the tower, but yet it kind of does. I made my point. I think some perspectives, not axons, at the entry points from the buildings from Alston Green would be helpful. This is a public amenity for the neighborhood, and I'm just curious. I see like a little tenuous pathway in between some buildings, but I'd love to see every single entry point into this super block, as Linda called it, to make sure that we understand what's happening there. And then I think maybe more related, tied to the massing, a larger context. A lot of planning is happening across the highway. Are we relating to any towers, you know, in a larger context, not just the immediate context? Would just be helpful just to remind us. And I think the other points have been made. So I think with that, if we want to see if there are any public comments, that would be good to do so now.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise their digital hand using the instructions presented on the screen. Please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioner Love, at this time, I do not see any hands raised to provide public testimony.
Commissioners, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion to send to subcommittee.
I'll take Jonathan's motion to move to subcommittee. Is there a
Yes.
second?
Second.
All right, and I'll call on everyone. Linda Easley,
Yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
Shauna Gillis-Smith,
Yes.
David Hassin,
Yes.
Mick Young Kim,
Yes.
Kathy Kotorides,
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Yes.
David Manfredi, Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
Yes, yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
and myself, Mimi Love. We look forward to seeing you in subcommittee. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, I think moving on to 294 West First Street.
Great. A presentation of planning context for the proposed project at 295 West First Street in South Boston will be given by Deputy Director of Zoning Compliance, Ted Schwartzberg, followed by a presentation of the proposed project by the proponent team, followed by a brief summary of design review feedback shared with the proponent team to date by BPDA staff member Seth Reisman. So we'll turn this over to Ted.
I'm sorry, Christina, I'm not here to present. I'm just here to observe. I'm sorry if there was a miscommunication.
Oh, that's not a problem. Okay. Seth Reisman, are you able to speak to these slides?
Yes, I can fill in for my colleagues in planning. If you give me 1 second, please.
Seth, if it would be better, we could come back to the planning context after the proponent team has given their presentation.
I'm ready now. Sorry for the delay.
No problem.
So the proposed project is in South Boston Neighborhood District and within a multifamily residential sub-district, the requirements of which are here on this slide. And as noted in the table, the proposed project is requesting variances on its height, setback, FAR, and usable open space per unit. The residential use is allowed by zoning and consistent with adjacent existing uses along this developing corridor. The requested relief, the proposed height has been the subject of much staff discussion and review. Staff have worked with the proponent to develop a massing and height scheme that is more consistent with the multi-story dwellings found in this context. Height as proposed produces a more optimal design outcome that is contextually appropriate. The proposed FAR has followed from the height conversation. The as of right FAR of 2 is quite restrictive. And so the FAR would not allow reasonable height beyond 2 or 3 stories following the setback guidance and zoning. The rear 0 lot line is contextual and would preserve street wall continuity with abutting future residential buildings. Next slide, please. There's no currently applicable plan for this project site, but it is located within the study area for the South Boston Transportation Action Plan, which is expected to be released later this year. This action plan seeks to implement strategies to eliminate serious and fatal traffic crashes, simplify intersections for all users, improve the transit network to make more efficient and reliable, expand the bike network, and improve walkability across the neighborhood. And this proposed project is located in a rapidly evolving area of South Boston, where industrial parcels like the project site are being redeveloped into primarily multifamily residential buildings with ground floor retail. Given this evolving land use context, the public realm and pedestrian conditions are lacking. Many sidewalks do not meet accessibility standards, are missing, or are in such poor condition that they are barely passable. On First Street, trees are almost non-existent. Cut through traffic causes unsafe speeding, and many parcels are large industrial buildings or used for surface parking or staging, creating a very inhospitable public realm. West 2nd Street is a much more residential context, with most buildings at a scale of 3 to 4 story row houses or smaller multifamilies. And this project seeks to address and remediate these conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth. We'd like to now turn it over to the proponent team for a brief presentation. We'll give you a halfway reminder and a 2-minute timer. Is representation from the proponent team for 295 West First Street available to present?
You should all have hosting abilities as well.
We see a raised hand.
Robert, I've given you ability.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. One moment and I'll get my screen shared. All right, thank you. I am Robert Leon with PCA. Also on the call is Eric. Oh, it's not sharing. Let me try that again. Did that work?
Yes.
Okay,
Looks like
sorry
it's
about
coming
that.
up. Mhm.
Great. Again, I'm Robert Leon with PCA. I'm also joined by David Chelinsky with PCA. Eric Leclerc with Jones Street is on the call, along with Katia Podciablo with Verdant Landscape as well. And thank you to the commissioners for taking the time to review this presentation. Moving into the greater site context, 295 West First Street is located in South Boston. The reddish-orange square in the center of the screen is our project location. It is fronted by West First Street to the north, East Street to the east, and West 2nd Street to the south. It shares a lot line with 270 West 2nd Street, which is a BPDA-approved site at the west of the site. We are located at a transition point between the existing South Boston neighborhood to the south, and to the north of this site is primarily industrial. However, a lot of that area will have future development to be more commercial in nature. We noted the reserve channel development on here, and the dashed yellow line around the light green is actually showing some of the open space that they are proposing. We are also proposing some open space at the corner of East Street and West 2nd Street. Open space is something that we've heard the neighborhood really desires, and it's becoming this potential network for future development of open space. I'd also note that we're within a half mile of the Broadway T station and various bus lines, close to the South Boston waterfront, Convention Center, Fort Point neighborhood. Lots of interesting things to do in this neighborhood. Zooming in more closely to our site, this is the existing Shaughnessy Crane Yard, if you're familiar with that location. And we are located adjacent to the Foundry building, which is a 5-story, roughly 67-foot building to the east of our site. 270 West 2nd is this parcel to the west of our site, as mentioned earlier. A few site contexts. This view 1 is looking up East Street. You can see the Foundry building on the right and our site to the left. Views 2 and 3 are looking east and west down West 2nd Street. I'd point out that there are existing street trees along West 2nd Street, which is something that we're looking to preserve and make sure that they thrive as this project moves forward. West 1st Street is shown down here in view 4. The sidewalks are very narrow and there's quite a number of curb cuts where trucks are moving in and out of the existing site. And we hope to greatly improve the public realm in this area. Moving into a massing diagram, the first thing we did in looking at our site is shoved the entire building back off the West 2nd Street sidewalk. There are the 8 street trees that I noted earlier are located along this area. And by pushing the building back, we're just trying to make sure that we preserve those root systems and ensure that they can continue to exist and thrive. The next move was to have a 4-story expression along the West 2nd Street by setting back the upper floors to push down that height, which is really about continuing the existing 4-story street wall along West 2nd Street. As we move to the corner of East Street and West 2nd Street, we push the building back again to create some open space at that corner. We felt that with the Foundry building, which is only about 7 feet plus or minus back from the sidewalk, that this corner was a great place to provide some relief from that street wall. It's also located at the south corner of the building, so it will get plenty of sunlight and be an enjoyable area to gather. The tones in here are kind of representing this transition of height. As we are at this transition point between the existing residential neighborhood and moving toward the future, which is most likely going to be taller commercial development, we're using the massing and this building as a transition from the 4-story language on West 2nd Street up to a 5-story expression, which then goes up to the Foundry building, but also a transition up East Street, going from the lower neighborhood context to the future taller commercial context in the future. We, as you'll see later in the perspective views, we tried to articulate the residential side with smaller scale vertical rhythms and more residential details and materials, while that transitions to a larger scale vertical rhythm on the commercial side. While we did have these varying expressions, we did tie them together with architectural elements that we can look at later. In this slide, we were just looking at the context of the Foundry building to the right, which is the dashed line moving across the screen, and the setback of 270 West 2nd Street is the red-orange dashed line. We intentionally tried to keep our upper story setbacks to be on average greater than 270, given the open space setback that we have. At the open space, we're a little under 54 feet from the curb line back to the major face of the building. And this elevation shows the approved 270 West 2nd Street. The 4-story expression continued, stepping up to 5, stepping up to the Foundry building to the east. Moving into the ground floor plan. First, I'd like to point out that we are talking with BTD about a raised intersection at East Street and West First Street. This is something that we have heard we need traffic calming within this area. People fly down West 2nd Street and they fly down East Street. So this was a way to provide something to slow people down. And it also was a way that it felt like it was kind of becoming this extension and this welcoming of people into the open space that we're providing at East Street and West 2nd. In addition, up at East Street and West First Street, we're proposing a raised crosswalk. I would also note that we're proposing curb extensions as well to minimize the distance that people have to cross the street. But again, this would be a traffic calming measure that we've heard is desirable within the neighborhood. Stats on the building, we are at 252 units, studios through 3 bedrooms. 125 parking spaces are provided, a 0.5 parking ratio, and the FAR is at 3.52. So moving around the building, I'm going to go clockwise just from the top. We do have one curb cut on West First Street that provides vehicular access into the parking garage. That is the 125 spaces. The parking garage is enclosed, so it will be screened from all of the public realm surrounding the building. We have an opportunity for community use or future retail. We think this is an area that might start out as more of a community use, but as West First Street continues to develop and retail becomes more appropriate, that could be a great place to have some retail. Our main building entrance is located at the corner of East Street and West First Street. We decided to split the lobby into 2 locations, the main one up at the top right corner, but also providing a secondary lobby just to provide more opportunities for residents to enter and exit the building, but also providing more locations of activation along the street. For that reason, we also split the bike room so that there was portions of the bike room at each lobby so that we could provide more community space throughout. As we move down and around to East Street and West 2nd Street, we are planning on having community use space and perhaps a cafe space surrounding that open space. We are hoping that this can be a space that's not only open to the public for daily use, but also something that could potentially be a spill out space for community uses and the cafe in the future.
Hi, I just want to let the proponent team let them know that it's a halfway point.
Great, thank you very much. One additional thing I note is we are showing our transformers tucked in. We pushed the building in and are providing screening. The screening is aligned with 270 West 2nd, and we made sure that it's not encroaching on any of the sidewalk widths that we need. Looking at the upper floor, at the 2nd floor, we have an amenity space overlooking the open space, and we also have an interior courtyard space that'll be available for residents to use. We intentionally created a pattern kind of pulling from Montreal so that people looking out from their residential units could have interesting texture and pattern within that courtyard. We're also matching the 270 West 2nd smaller courtyard at the property line of the building, which gives us about 36 feet building to building. As we move up to the 5th floor, you can start to see some of the setbacks to provide the 4-story expression. And then at the 6th story, we have some setbacks for the 5-story expression. These diagrams are showing an everyday use, Adirondack chairs, places for people to gather, central lawn for people to hang out with. We also provided this notion of a neighborhood potluck idea, the idea being that this open space at the corner is a flexible area that serves the community, the greater neighborhood community, as well as the community uses. Moving into some perspectives and street views, top left is looking east down West 2nd Street. You can see 270 West 2nd in the foreground. Our building is in the midground, and you can see the Foundry building peeking up above the trees. bottom right image is standing at the Foundry building, looking back toward our building. You can see the raised intersection and the open space at the corner of our building, and the transition of these expressions from 4-story to 5-story expressions up to the Foundry building. We provided a couple sidewalk views as well, just to get a sense of what those sidewalks will feel like. This image provides a view looking from the corner of West 2nd and E into the open space. We do rise up 18 inches with sloped walkways, provide site walls and various seating opportunities. And in the next slide, we'll wrap around to see the green space, which you can access either going up sloped walkways, or there's one 6-inch step to make sure that it is easy to get to this open space from the existing sidewalks. Here are some E Street perspectives, a sidewalk perspective down at the bottom left, and the facade perspective at the top right. This is where you can see a break in the building and a transition from the West 2nd Street side to the West 1st Street side. I'd note that we're using the same building expressions and detailing around window expressions and detailing around the windows, as well as the paneling between windows. Cornicing elements are consistent around. We just changed the scale of vertical elements and the color palette to become more commercial in nature on the West 1st Street side. These views wrap around to the West 1st Street side. We have an existing condo building in the foreground here, transitioning to the approved 270 West 2nd Street building in the middle. And you can see our proposed 295 West 1st Street toward the end. Again, a larger scale of the vertical rhythm and pulling from the rhythm already established at 270 West 2nd Street. Lastly, we wanted to provide a plan perspective and perspective view from within the courtyard. It is a large courtyard, which we think we can provide a variety of seating opportunities and even possibly some sculptural opportunities coordinating with the community uses down on the ground floor. With that, that is the conclusion of our presentation, and I can hand it back over for comments.
Great. We'll flip this over to Seth Reisman to give a brief summary of staff comments shared with the proponent to date.
Thank you, Christina. So I'm standing in for my colleague, Adam Johnson, who has taken over this project from Matt Martin. We've been working with the proponent for a while, particularly on the siting of the building, the edges, and the nature of the open space on the corner. We're particularly interested in how do we experience and continue to improve the pedestrian experience along West 2nd Street, which is in the lower left corner and down on page. How do we screen and limit the back of house and blank wall conditions, including potentially moving the transformer inside? We also think that proponent has done a good job of evolving the open space at the corner, so-called porch. We think this needs to be looked at further. What are the materials? How does it relate to the uses that wrap it? And how do we make sure that this feels very public and not necessarily privatized by the users of this development? And then also number 3 on the top right, which is the primary lobby. We're very sorry, the text here is wrong. It's not so much about the experience on West 1st Street, although that is important. It's also about the nature of the entranceway, which is underneath and overhang above. Really, what is the character of that entranceway? And how does it contribute to the sidewalk, as well as provide a great transition to the front door? Next slide, please. In terms of the massing and materiality, we were looking to better understand when and why the height modulates to respond to the context, as well as then how the articulation relates to that. I think we heard the proponent address that in today's presentation. But drilling down a little bit more closely, really, how did the two material expressions meet? What are their joint conditions? And are we reading this as one building, two buildings, many buildings? given the different approaches. And what is the logic for when the different materials are used, particularly the brick, in relationship to the other materials? And with that, I will turn it back to Mimi. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. I will open it up to commissioners. Mick Young. But maybe we can have either a site plan, maybe a site plan
That'd be helpful.
up.
Yep, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I think this is a great start. There's a lot that I appreciate about the project. I think it's great that you didn't build this all the way out to the streetscape without some breathing room at some of the corners. I'd like to understand better the overall streetscape experience. So when you come to subcommittee, it'd be great to see some street sections to see the kind of the tightest. I appreciate that you put in the dimensions, but would like to see what that gray bar means, and are there any kind of green streets initiatives that you're proposing for this project? I would like to focus on the corner of West 2nd and East Street. I would love to see in subcommittee some options of what other things you've considered for this corner. I'm not, when I look at the perspective, I'm not really clear about the role of the lawn in this, and maybe what would be helpful. You talked about some great programming options, which is like having some spill out seating from the cafe, but it's hard for me to see how the plaza and this green space is used. So maybe you could overlay kind of different scales of uses so we could see what can actually happen and how it serves the community. I would just take a look at this kind of swatch of lawn and its shape to see if that is the best configuration for this civic space, and how it's serving both communities.
Thanks, Mick Young. Catherine?
I actually want to second Commissioner Kim. That corner with the lawn feels very jagged. Feels like it deserves some curvature to it in comparison to the rest of the sidewalk itself. So I would love to see some other considerations as well. It just doesn't, it feels more intrusive than welcoming from all dimensions that have been presented. So that's something that I'm strongly recommending, along with Commissioner Kim, to have some other options available.
Thanks, Catherine. Anne Marie?
I have some similar comments to my fellow commissioners. I would be curious in subcommittee to better understand your strategy for not only where you've located the green space, but also the other ground floor uses. So what determined where building entrances are, why for instance, the major entrance to the living units is not off the green space, why surface areas are located in one place or not, and how those relate to the adjoining context. As I understand it, one of the issues regards the height of the building. I think it is helpful within what we're seeing that height does not trouble me, but I am curious about what the impact of the new development is on adjoining, particularly the smaller scale neighborhood across from 2nd Street. So how the uses, particularly at the ground floor, relate to that. And then also in respect to the architecture, I noticed that there is a difference in the architecture between the 1st Street and 2nd Street. And I understand some of that is because it's addressing a different context, but I'm just, again, would like to better understand the strategy behind that. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Laura Solano?
I too will talk about the entries to the buildings, and there have been some important things said about the space at 2nd and East Street. Just a couple of things to maybe help the proponents to think about this space more deeply, and that is, what is the character of this? Is this a civic space? Is it, does it serve the building so that people who are in the neighborhood and use those community uses Do they kind of spill out? Is it an everyday space for the neighborhood? I think it's important to think about programming for sure, but I also think it's important first to think about what are the characteristics of that space. I'm also curious to know if the neighborhood has been polled about what they would like to see in this space. I always get a little nervous with lawns in completely urbanized spaces because more often than not, they become dog parks unintentionally. And that can kind of create a lot of problems. And so I guess I question whether or not a lawn is the right thing to have there to begin with. And then the lobby space on First and E Street, the public space outside of the door, feels a little, I don't understand it. I'd like to know more about how that works, how those spaces interact, and likewise with the smaller lobby on West 2nd Street. So I think sort of backing up and helping us understand how those, relatively precious spaces are going to serve the neighborhood as well as the people in this. And I noticed behind the church, there's a large lawn. I'm not really sure what that serves or who it serves. I'd love to see sort of the larger context of green spaces. You started to get at that with future developments, but I'd love to know what other choices people in this dense neighborhood have for that. And then last, these are social spaces, and figuring out what the characteristics are of urban social spaces is really important as well. So with that, I'll look forward to talking more about this in subcommittee.
Thanks, Laura. Shauna?
Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. And I do appreciate, as was mentioned, the idea of pulling away from the street wall on that corner, which has kind of opened you up to the concerns that we all have about that corner. I'm not going to repeat everything that my colleagues have so aptly said, but I do want to focus. The ideal would be for it to be bigger. Honestly, is there a way to make that space bigger? But then I also think we need to understand the scale of the space. Sort of I'm ballparking without including the streetscape. It's about 3,000 square feet, which is a pretty small exterior space. So one thing that, in addition to the other things that my colleagues have mentioned, I think would be helpful for us to understand in subcommittee are some scale comparisons of similar spaces of whichever character we end up landing on. If it's a green space, if it's more of a hardscape space, if it's more of a porch or more of a lawn, however that it develops, I'd like to see some similar scaled spaces so that we can understand what we're really suggesting in this location.
Thanks,
Thank
Shauna.
you.
So Kirk, I see your thumb is raised, so I will get to you. I don't know if you're having difficulty.
I'm
Just letting you
sorry.
know I'm seeing you. Okay, I'm just
No.
gonna let Bill go first, and then
No
you're up
rush.
next.
No rush.
Okay.
Thank you, Mimi. I want to compliment Robert on how articulate he was about many of the details, and that was very helpful because it shared with us the intentions. But I do want to focus at least on a couple big picture questions that concern me. And I think the biggest big picture question is the question of the continuous street wall on 2nd E and First Street, with the exception, of course, of the corner of E and 2nd. It feels, I'm a big believer in street walls, continuity generally, but when they get kind of much too boring and relentless, then they lose their kind of urbanistic appeal. And I think that's kind of what's happening here. And I'd really like at subcommittee to have the petitioners really look at ways to loosen up the street walls, not in terms of bunches of ins and outs, but in just a kind of proportion and massing. So that's point number one. Point number two is clearly everyone's focused on the open spaces. It does seem curious to me that the main lobby is on the northeast corner of the building, the darkest, coldest corner of the building. And I don't quite understand why that is. And so I'd love, again, a kind of broad philosophical discussion of that versus why it might not have been better on the south side of the building. And as you deal with this, then you're dealing with the uses along the first floor, many of which are quite dead in terms of the neighborhood, particularly. I mean, bike storage is dead space by and large. Maybe you can, so those are the three things I'd like to have the petitioners address.
Thanks, Bill. Kirk?
Thank you. Sorry about that. I wasn't trying to get your attention that badly, but I do like to pick up for a moment on what Bill started to talk about in terms of the dynamic nature of the first floor. I think it would help when you come to committee if you could help us understand traffic flows, which side of the street is more active than the other. You know, are these spaces really activating, or are they unclear? And so I think that would be very helpful. The second comment has to do with some of the materiality and the typology of the surrounding neighborhood. I think we'd really like to get a better understanding when you come to subcommittee of what are the components of this neighborhood that you can work with in some greater granularity. So maybe it's some up close pictures, some materials, you know, things that will make this place feel comfortable. And then I can't help but comment a little bit on some of the renderings, because there appeared to be things like darker hanging panels that didn't come to the ground, or were they veneers? So all of that, I think, fits into this notion of what's the typology for this neighborhood that a building of this nature can work with. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirk. Jonathan Evans.
Thank you. Just to quickly expand on those last 2 points and something that Marie said earlier, I think, you know, the basic typology of the courtyard building makes a lot of sense. I appreciate the aspirations of the public gesture. I agree with a lot of the comments around what that space is in the corner. I think, yeah, as you look at some of the massing articulations, the bays that have a different expression on First Street versus Second Street, I guess I'd want to be able to better understand the rationale for that, and honestly where those two systems come together. Like, what happens when you have a triangle meeting a square, right? Where does that occur? And so maybe it's a question of you know, I'm going to channel Bill. If there was a model we can see and get our heads around, we can sort of see how that works better. But just really understanding, like, where do these geometric moves at a secondary, what's the logic behind them, and where do they has a logic kind of go all the way through the project? And also, just what is the relationship between a geometric gesture and the material expression? Because kind of to Kirk's point, I think there's a lot of ambition and a lot of sort of different materials, colors being shown, and just sort of what are the rules in terms of creating that visual interest and how it sort of, again, ties across these 3 street fronts. So I mean, I think it could be as simple as sharing, like, you know, a full-on street elevation of Second, E, and First Street. I think the perspectives are compelling, but they're kind of these vignettes. It's hard to sort of see in totality how this whole thing comes together. And maybe just one comment to Bill's comment on the lobby. I guess I would say I appreciate that you have 2 lobbies, which I think is helpful to sort of mitigate the scale of the block. And yeah, I think it's a fair question in terms of what should go where and how that kind of gets prioritized relative to where we want to sort of cultivate the most activity.
Sorry, Mimi, are you frozen?
Take that as a yes, and I think Donna has her hand up.
Chair Easley, I don't know if you're able to step in. I'm also happy to facilitate.
I will, but Mimi's lucky. She got frozen in a pretty good look there. I saw Shauna, your hand up and now it's down.
Yeah, it was somehow it was an accident. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Do we have any other comments from commissioners? All right, Christina, I think we are ready for some public comment. If there is any.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance whom may wish to contribute public testimony to raise their digital hand using the instructions presented on the screen. Please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Maura Martinelli, you have your hand raised. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Okay, my name is Maura Martinelli. I have my husband. We live with our 2 kids on First Street. We've been living there since 2016. We're raising our kids in the city. We love living in the city. I have a couple comments to make about First Street in general, and then I'll move to this project. So First Street, as was said earlier, has almost no trees on it, literally no trees, which turns it into a heat island over the summer. So it's like extremely hot with no shade, and it's kind of a desolate landscape. And I feel like with this project, as much as I love seeing trees, I don't feel like there are enough trees. And I feel like the sidewalks on First Street are so unsafe. There are people like walking in the middle of the road on First Street because the sidewalks are so terrible. So those need to be like built out and made safe. And just in general, the lack of greenery it's like a desolate street to live on, kind of. So I would love to see more of that. And I don't understand why people don't really give credence to the fact that there is a neighborhood on First Street. There's hundreds of us that live on the corner of First and Pappas Way. And I feel like this project is more tailored to Second Street and up towards St. Vincent's. And somebody talked about St. Vincent's a little bit earlier. St. Vincent's is a park, but it's fallen into disarray. So you like cannot bring your kids to that park. So we are in desperate need of a park and greenery and like livable neighborhood, like, and also on this project, I see 1 and 2 bedrooms. I see no 3 bedrooms. And so no family can stay, or, you know, like there's no family staying in the city anymore because of all the tiny units. So I have a lot to say on this project. I do appreciate it. I'm glad to see like some greenery go in, but we need much, much more than what I'm seeing.
Thank you so much, Mara, for your comment. And that'll be time.
Any other comments, Christina?
I am not seeing, I'm sorry, Maura, your hand is still raised. I'm not seeing any other raised hands at this time, Chair.
Mimi's got her hand up. She may not be able to hear us.
Let's say, give us 1 second to promote Mimi to co-host to be able to unmute herself.
Yeah, you should be ready to go. Sorry about that, because I think you rejoined.
I was just going to add, and maybe Mimi will want to transition the meeting in a different way, but one of the things that is so interesting about this site and that Christina brought up earlier is it's such an important site between the Reserve Channel development and then also the development that we've been looking at in kind of smaller chunks over at Gillette. And so I think the comment that Mara made and also that other commissioners have made tonight are really important, that First Street and Second Street become incredibly important corridors, part of this urban neighborhood going forward for many years with the two developments I mentioned and also many more. So We look forward to seeing more work on this project. And with that, can I have a motion to send to subcommittee?
So moved.
And a second?
Second,
All in favor say yes. Anne Marie Lubenow,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
thank you, Laura. Bill Ron,
Yes.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Kirk Sykes,
Yes.
Kathy Kotaritis,
Yes.
Mick Young Kim,
yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
Shauna Gilly Smith,
Yes.
and myself, yes. We will see you in subcommittee. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think Lizzie is still trying to work on some technical issues with Commissioner Love. But in the interim, Commissioner Easley, I'd recommend that we move to the next project proposal at 250 Everett Street in Brighton.
Sounds great. And I think we have some presentations by BPDA staff.
Yes, so a brief presentation of the planning context for the proposed project will be given by Seth Reisman, followed by a presentation of the proposed project given by representatives of the proponent team, followed by design review feedback shared with the proponent team to date, again by Seth Reisman. Tonight's the Seth Reisman show. So Seth, if you're able to kick us off.
Thank you, Christina. And yes, I'm filling in as a substitute for many of my colleagues and at the start here for planning and zoning. So 250 Everett Street, located in Brighton, is interested in pursuing PDA for their site. We wanted to discuss that. The parcel is located in two subdistricts of the Alston-Brighton Neighborhood District. Requirements of both subdistricts have been considered in staff review thus far: the Everett-Telford Community Commercial Subdistrict and Barry's Corner Community Subdistrict. The zoning for this area states that a PDA is appropriate when it is used to help a proposal better address planning goals developed through the WACR-Z process. And WACR-Z is the acronym for the planning for this area. Creation of new street connections. This project dedicates space for two or half of two right-of-ways, half of 34 and 20 feet wide, to facilitate future street network extensions. Next slide, please. The zoning itself, Article 51 was recently updated per WACR-Z, which stands for the Western Avenue Corridor Study and Rezoning Report. As a dimensional analysis, the project is consistent with use, height, and lot coverage requirements for PDAs in both subdistricts. And for FAR, the zoning code provides for a density bonus as noted in this table. And we will assume that the proponent will continue to work with BPDA staff to get a housing affordability program that is appropriate for this density bonus. Additionally, this project is much needed housing for the city. The zoning and project design was informed by WACR-Z. More detailed, one of the other key items for the context here is connectivity. There are currently very large blocks in this area as it's occupied the site right behind this by a large shopping and surface parking lot. So WACR-Z had projected potential street connections to provide better connectivity through the district. We continue to work with the proponent on consolidating driveways with an abutter, or potentially, and establish east-west and north-south vehicular connectivity through the site. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Seth. We'll turn it over to the proponent team for their presentation.
Christina, can I ask one question? Oh, I was going to ask a question while Seth had that slide up. But Seth, maybe you can just answer it orally. So from what you said, is this project FAR compliant or not compliant?
I believe that, and actually, if you can go back one slide. I believe that the project is zoning compliant. It is taking advantage of a density bonus, which is allocated if there are certain affordability requirements, and we are still working through those specific affordability requirements with the proponent.
Okay, thanks so much.
Good evening. Brian O'Connor from Cube 3. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Appreciate everyone's time and energy. I know it's been a long night. We'll try to go relatively quickly. Also with me is Tim Alexander from Mill Creek Residential, the primary proponent, and Ian Ramey from Copley Wolf, who will be talking to landscape design as we move through here. What we'd like to do is just start to walk through the project here. What we're looking at here is the overall site. As was mentioned, that the site is located on Everett. We're at 250 Everett Street, and you'll notice we're sort of directly adjacent to the Western Ave corridor. We have the Star Market above our site and the large parking lot above our site. To the south, which is left on the page, we have a north arrow in the lower right. To the south of our site, we have the McNamara House Senior Living. We also have the German International School sort of diagonally across the corner. And then directly on the other side of Everett, we're abutting the residential neighborhood. So it's a quite diverse neighborhood that we're sort of working in here. We did work very hard through the process to try to make sure everything that's being proposed is compliant both with the WACRZ guidelines and zoning, as mentioned, through use, density, height, and everything else. So the site itself, a couple of quick photos. There's a key in the lower left here. So view A is on the upper left, and this is looking across the Star Market parking. And you can see there's a very light dotted red outline that's just sort of intended to represent the site area itself in that image on the upper left. The image on B is looking north down Everett Street. So you can see on the right hand, this is the image in the upper right. On the right hand side, you have the residential neighborhood. On the left hand side, you have our project site sort of right in the middle there. And you'll notice the little pavilion is actually for the McNamara House in the immediate foreground. Looking in the other direction on Everett in the image in the lower right, it's far more industrial, sort of on our side of the street here. 250 Everett is effectively where that building lives behind the power lines on the right-hand side. In the immediate foreground, you have an entry drive to Star Market parking lot, as well as the Petco in the immediate foreground on the far right. As we started looking at the site and thinking about how to articulate massing and building strategies, we sort of walked through a series of options. I don't want to spend a lot of time on these, but I think it is helpful to try to sort of understand how we arrived at our current proposal. So when we started looking at this, we thought, you know, maybe what we needed to do is get the parking to work in a podium style configuration. And we were a little concerned about the edge along the street, but sort of the initial concept was to break the building into two sections along Everett, thinking there might be some nice qualities to creating a little bit of a street wall, having some sort of a central courtyard, and turning two additional courtyards towards the Star Market Plaza, which we knew would see future development. We then jumped to option two because we really didn't like all of the parking along the street edge. And so you can see what we did here is we sort of carved the building into three sections along Everett, dropped one of the courtyards to at grade by peeling the parking back and trying to articulate the building so it would be a little bit more responsive to what we thought was the scale and the texture of the neighborhood. And this building was also about 440 feet in total length on the site. We then looked at option three and we said, well, maybe what we really ought to do is pull the parking completely back from the edge by tightening it up and allowing building ends to kind of wrap down and engage the street and create a little bit more of a buffer. So there was no direct parking against the edge of the street. And this allowed us to have sort of 3 elevated courtyards, all facing Everett, breaking this up a little bit more. What we then did through the planning process, we started working with the sort of WACRZ guidelines relative to, as was earlier mentioned, some of the street configurations and thinking about how this worked. The current proposal and compliance with the guidelines, WACRZ, would really require an entry drive and a through road that you can see sort of outlined in the plan in red. And there's a lot of lines here, and they sort of represent the drive aisles, the sort of sidewalk condition, and then the tree planting strip. And what it does is it puts a fairly significant amount of land area on the north or the right-hand side of the building that's allocated to roadway that would then wrap around the west side and then turn again to the west in front of where the Star Market is right now to allow this future roadway connection. What this did is it had the effect of reducing the building available building envelope fairly significantly. And what we try to do is think about how that would inform the way we were thinking about the site strategically. There is a quick section in the lower right, because I know a question that keeps coming up is, what does this roadway or this potential roadway mean in the future to the landscape proposal that Ian's going to walk through fairly quickly. And what I wanted to show, the section on the right, the sort of underlying section is the day one condition, or what we're actually proposing, where the existing parking, and then there's sort of a sidewalk condition, planting zones, tree zones, and then more planting zones. The red is actually what happens if in a potential scenario we do end up building a road there. And this is just to sort of let everyone know that what it does is it actually, the pedestrian zone would shift closer to the building. The tree zone and the planting zone basically stays where it is. So all of that really led us to our current site strategy. And what we did here is we said, we need to push the parking below grade. So all of the parking that we're currently proposing is below grade, about 120 spaces or 0.5 per unit. We've looked at this and said, we really want to divide this into 2 visually distinct buildings that would allow a better texture and rhythm along the street, eliminate some of the building wall that kind of was defining the edge of Everett, take these courtyards that are now at grade because the parking is below, and make sure they're open to the street, and really double down on the notion that vehicular and service corridor really is on the north or right-hand side of the street where that WACRZ road network would be. So down on the bottom, we just ran a very quick section through the site. Again, everything that we're proposing is zoning and WACRZ guideline compliant, but there are a couple of things to note from a height standpoint. The McNamara House Senior Living to our south is about the same height. We're proposing a 65-foot high building here. And then over on the right, 304 Western Ave, the current Petco building is actually a single-story building. So what we looked at, though, is there is sort of a datum line on this side of the street, as well as the other side of the street in the residential neighborhood that's sort of between 1 and 2 stories that we wanted to make sure that we were thinking about and paying attention to as we articulated and thought about what this building should look like.
Proponent team, please be aware that you've reached a little bit over the halfway point.
Okay, I'm going to really speed up. I'm sorry, guys. So typical plans, building plan on the top of the page is the ground floor, 240 units. As I mentioned, lobby, leasing, main entry on the northeast corner, right at that main intersection that we're talking about. We did try to create very active edges along the street where we could, service and vehicles to the north side. Ian will talk in a few minutes about all the active green space around the building. Bike storage is located on the northwest side or the top right of the page with at-grade access. All building entries everywhere around the site, the lobby on building 1 to the left and the lobby on the right for building 2 are both at grade with flush access, and any grading conditions are dealt with ramping in the building. 6th floor plan on the bottom of the page shows an amenity area and a roof deck. We do have a mix of studio 1, 2, and 3 bed units, including approximately 41 affordable. We have erred on the side of a higher ratio of 1, 2, and 3 bed than studios, trying to bring that average net rentable up here, which we think is a benefit to the neighborhood. Quick section just to show the 65-foot height, the roof deck on the top with the amenity area, amenity down low, parking below grade, quick parking plan at 120 spaces. From an architecture and design standpoint, this is an image looking, you can see the key plan in the upper left. So we're looking south. This is the building, what we're calling kind of building 2, the main entry, the amenity space on the lower right-hand side. You can see the roof deck and the amenity area on the 6th floor at the top edge in the foreground. You can also see a couple of things we're trying to do here is really differentiate the buildings in color, tone, texture, material, and probably most important in the way these buildings are detailed and articulated. There's a 2-story masonry base kind of wrapping the corner, creating that strong datum line here on this building. Looking in the other direction, this is kind of building 1 over on the other side, adjacent to the McNamara house on the left-hand side in the foreground. You can see a little bit of the residential neighborhood to the right in this image. Very simple, clean, clear architectural style here. Datum at the single story here, jumping up to the double story in the other building as we get towards Western Ave. We tried to play quite a bit, not only with color and tone of the buildings, but also roof line, little steps in and out of the building, and most importantly, maybe is the patterning of the building, the windows, the mullions, the balconies. All of these things are different from one building to another. Quick elevation, you can start to see sort of in the overall elevation at the top of the page, we sort of have building 1 and building 2, and then an enlargement in the lower right where we start to kind of get a little more granular with the materials and the differences between these buildings. Making sure we don't run out of time and get to public realm, I want to make sure Ian has a chance to talk us quickly through the site plan.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks, commissioners, for sticking with us tonight. I'll go very quickly because I know we're late on time. I'm Ian Ramey with Copley Wolf. Our landscape approach for the project really is to try to develop the building in as much green as possible. And to that end, we have about 43% of the site area is open space and about 25% of the area is vegetated. So that's kind of our overall strategy. One of the things that we did, as Brian mentioned, by having the ability to put the garage below grade, that gave us the opportunity to bring these landscape interventions in the courtyards to street level. That helps us to break up the street wall and have these green moments that break up the facade in the different moments. When we talk about the streetscape itself, if we start on Everett Street, that's a neighborhood connector as it relates to complete streets. Our strategy there is to preserve the existing street trees, of which we have 5, those are in the darker blue, and then to supplement them with an additional 11 trees and to treat that as a vegetated infiltration strip to help manage the stormwater on site. We're also widening the sidewalk to 8 feet. And then behind that, we have these moments of inflection where the public realm comes into the courtyard moment and has public seating opportunities to try to activate and enrich the public realm along Everett Street. As we turn around on the right side, which is the northern side of the plan, as mentioned, we are in a position here where we're trying to fully accommodate the Wacker Z cross-section on our site. We still, against the face of building, have a sidewalk and a planting strip, and then we have the future road, which would basically be an extension of Raymond Street on the north side of our site. Here's where the parking access and the loading access to the building occurs. And in the upper right-hand corner is where we have our blue bikes positioned. Those are in close proximity to the interior bike room in the upper corner. So there's a good, sort of synergy of bike uses there. As we turn around the top side of the plan, which is the western side, we have a meandering landscape walk that's enveloped in landscape. There's seating moments along that walkway. And the street trees the trees that are proposed there are envisioned to be able to accommodate that future right of way. So if and when that full streetscape gets brought to fruition, there'll be larger trees that can contribute to that street section on day one. So we're trying to anticipate that future condition. As we go to the south side on the left part of the plan, we're trying to address the guidelines in the Wacker Z that call for more porosity through block. So we have a pedestrian walkway that links between Everett Street and the Star Market site. In the future plan, there's supposed to be an open space sort of in the footprint of Star Market. So this pedestrian walkway that goes through will have seating moments in connection to that larger open space. We're also trying to preserve existing trees on the southern side of the site to have that mature canopy. And then I guess the last thing that I'll note is the proponent has been speaking with the residents of the McNamara House, and they're amenable to, and we're trying to really figure out a way to have a strong connection between the two sites. They have an existing pavilion, which is shown in that white rectangle there. So we'll be working through some great configurations and trying to have a stronger connection between those two residential properties. And I think with that, I'll open it up to conversation.
Thank you, Ian. Seth, could you just take us home quickly on staff comments?
Thank you, Christina. On the top right, you'll see a diagram produced from the Wackersy study, which speculatively extended the roadway network from down on page at both Brentwood and Raymond Street, up through this area and then across two streets on the other side of Telford Street, as well as to the far left of the page. Unfortunately, the property ownership did not jive well with this intended street road network, but our most important priority here is to make sure that we do have connection from Everett to the future redevelopment. What we anticipate at some point would be the future redevelopment of the Star Market and its surface parking lot, and connections again further up on page to Telford Street. So given these property lines, there was not a great position to extend Brentwood Street on the left, particularly with the existing housing. And so mainly looking to have an offset street on the far right. The proponent had showed that street entirely on their property, but we are working to see if we can get that street shared with the adjacent property, with the idea of moving the building as far to right on page as possible to maximize the open space between the existing structure where we do have a lot of mature canopy trees. Next, please. The building is approximately 400 feet long. We have a question if the proposed courtyards are really sufficient strategy enough to address this building scale, particularly the building length along Everett Street, or would the possibility of separating the buildings and creating a pedestrian use between the two sides be more appropriate? And we'll now turn it over to commissioners for comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth and Christina. A few comments as commissioners are raising their hands. Brian and Ian, thanks for a good presentation. What we'll do now is commissioners will give suggestions for things for you to bring to subcommittee, so no need to answer any questions today. And then the second is a comment for commissioners. So commissioners, along with the First Street project, which we just saw, this is the second example of a project being brought to BCDC very early on in the process, within a couple of months of the proponent working with BPDA staff. So it gives us an opportunity to offer some comments upstream. And with that, I will open up the floor to any of the commissioners. Just raise your Zoom hand and we can get your thoughts and comments to the proponent. Catherine, we'll start with you. Thank you.
Sure. Going back to the presentation on page 12, I believe where it was, there's two things that I just wanted to make comments on. One is the overall.
Brian, could you get us to that slide deck on page 12 for Catherine's comment? Thank you.
It's all the walkways that surround the entire building itself lacks a little bit of character. There could be some curve or better usage of how to make these pathways a little bit more appealing and engaging. They seem to kind of be a hit or miss on one side or the other. So I'd like to see some other ideas in ways in which these pathways could be better designed, complementary to the building. With that being said, I think I've been struggling about entry points to the building itself. Given on Everett Street, with the housing that currently exists across the street, and given that Everett Street seems to be a very busy street, I'm not sure that where you currently have these kind of amenity spaces, if that's the best side to use that on, or if it's more on the other side, not sure. But, you know, in terms of how people get there and engage with those amenity spaces, it seems very unclear. It doesn't seem to fit together, given those three options that you presented early on in the presentation. That's all that I have.
Thank you, Catherine. Anne Marie?
Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciated seeing this project early, and particularly walking us through your strategy to address the massing. So particularly slides 4 and 6, I found helpful. I actually quite like the kind of option 3, and of course the conclusion to putting the parking below grade. I think the approach to the massing overall as a strategy is a good way of moderating the small scale of the neighborhood with what will presumably be larger scale development. On the other side, I would like to, when it comes to subcommittee, better understand the context in terms of both what it is now, so zooming out a bit more, as well as what it could be. I appreciate all the background on Whacker Z, but I feel like we've seen a lot of proposals or a lot of proposed development in this area, and I'm trying to recall what it looks like in its build out. So having that context would be helpful. I am maybe a little, I'm a little less disturbed by the kind of the overall massing of the building, and more so about, I do think the courtyards help. I am concerned about the differentiation of the building elevations. So I think better being able to focus some time when it comes to subcommittee would be, be to have an opportunity to look at the elevations and also the surrounding context. For instance, what would be, going back to the idea of a site section, what would it be? What is the condition of this proposed new development with the smaller scale houses across the street? Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Shauna.
Thank you, Brian and Ian. A very, very clear presentation. I too also very much appreciated the studies. It's a very efficient building it seems to be a very efficient building from my landscape perspective. But I'm a little, I think the landscape moves are strong moves, but it feels very peripheral and a little bit just the landscape around the edges. So I think any moves that could start strengthening the landscape and also strengthening the public experience of the landscape, because the courtyards, as I understand it, are primarily amenity spaces associated with the residents. So it's primarily streetscape, and then the this pocket park plaza on the left-hand side, as well as the walkway along the top of the plan north. So the different strategies that were presented of potentially shifting the building to the right to make that one space larger. I also think the concept of getting the extra space with a pedestrian muse, but in that instance, if we were doing that, then the public spaces both at the front, at the south and the north, where that muse would land, would become public spaces, not just open spaces. But I think trying to find a way to really develop some significant public open space that isn't just about the very, very nice green promenade around, or streets and promenade around the building. So I think the landscape is strong as it's in its genesis, but I think having a more significant green space that is public for a building of this scale would help the building and help the neighborhood.
Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and some of the logic around the massing. I certainly appreciate the aspiration as well of pushing the parking down and kind of being able to open up the ground floor for something beyond just housing cars. Look, I mean, I think the one thing, maybe building off what Shauna just said, that's tricky is there's not, the plan is very efficient and there's not a very clear opportunity for relief to be able to sort of provide a little bit more breathing room. I think the courtyards, are going to be the courtyards, open space are going to be the sort of key strategy towards breaking the scale of the building down. I mean, I even wonder positioning wise, how do the courtyards relate to the urban context? I mean, could a courtyard actually open up more intentionally to Raymond Street at the bottom there? Like, where do the courtyards sit relative to the urban fabric? I understand that right now they're kind of optimized to the sort of building aggregation diagram for the units. So that could be something that starts to like give the courtyard, give the green space a little bit more agency to actually shape the building. Obviously understanding that the targets need to hit in terms of unit counts and whatnot. I respect those. And also just like, again, the scale of each courtyard is the same. The scale of the open space front and back, there's a kind of, it's hard to see a clear hierarchy. So again, maybe giving the open space a little bit more agency to kind of to plug into the urban fabric, and I appreciate the connection to McNamara House. I think that's helpful in doing that, but I think pushing that more would be helpful to see through in subcommittee to help kind of evolve this. But I think, you know, the scale kind of mid-rise building, 6 stories makes a lot of sense. It's just, how can we better position those moments of relief to you know, be more intentional, be a softer edge to bring the public in, better relate to the context of the housing on the side of Everett Street. But a lot of good stuff to play with here.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'll just add a few comments. I will say that the diagram that Seth showed was really compelling at the beginning of this presentation, and I'm wondering and would love to talk more about this at subcommittee, whether there are any opportunities to go ahead and bring Raymond Street through this site, connecting to the future Wackersey roadway in exchange for creating a little bit more height on the remainder of the site. And the reason I'm asking that, and would love to kind of hear it explored in subcommittee, is that this project seems a little bit the same all the way around. And what I think we're talking about is really this need to have a kind of prominent open space, which I think could be afforded by having Raymond Street come through and potentially having the area maybe to the north of that proposed through road, maybe devoted as an open space within the boundaries of this project. So I'd be really curious to see that explored. And the other thing that I'd love to learn a little bit more about, if that's not possible, or if you've tested that and there are reasons against that, is this idea of breaking the building in the middle. And I think you've talked about, Brian, maybe you talked about this, of having that pedestrian muse, or maybe Ian. So right now, if we can look at an elevation along Everett Street. Thank you. So what I'm going to call kind of that sandwich piece, which you have rendered here in the lighter gray, it's the same height as the balance of the other two, what I'll call wings. And if that were removed to kind of create a pedestrian passageway, or actually the massing was reduced so that there was some differentiation in the bays. I think that'd be something I'd be really curious to understand more about, but primarily to really understand what could happen if Raymond Street did come forward and a larger open space explored. So we have a couple of additional hands. So Bill, I'll start with you.
Yes, could the petitioners put the slide that is looking down Everett Street with the building on the right? Yes, that slide. This is a kind of follow on to what Linda just laid out and others have mentioned in other contexts, particularly about the courtyards. I just hope, Brian, your presentation was very clear. You're always very articulate. And so as a result, it lets us learn about the project very quickly. But when I saw this view in the materials before the meeting, and I was struck by how it was just the relentless blocking of 4 buildings that seemed a lot alike. I realize you talked about maybe having different colors of brick and things like that, but I think the relentless stepping down the street has to also be reflected in the architecture to bring more variety to these 4 elements, because right now they all read very much alike. And I think it's a serious problem because it's a long 400-foot building, and there's just no let up to the experience. And I hope we can discuss that in committee meetings.
Thank you, Bill. Kirk?
Yeah, I think Bill's points are well taken, and I think kind of looking at the modularity of what happens across the street in terms of the scale of the buildings will help us better understand how you've thought about maybe imprinting some of that scale and modulation into these buildings, because I think what I'm hearing Bill say maybe is quite a horizontal expression, especially, which gives it some institutional or reinforces the institutional character. I do think the balconies definitely in these 2 buildings help break up the scale. I will say, coming from the other direction, when you showed us the image, I had the exact opposite response. It just seemed that there were so many of the same, just the redundancy of the treatment, with sort of indifference to whether it's facing outward or inward to a courtyard or the scale of who's where. So those are the kinds of things I think would help us understand more. And then the last thing I'd mention, or 2 last things. One is, if others spoke about it in the site plan, if you could just put it up. I'm sorry if I missed it, but these where you've nibbled away at the corners, the interior corners of these courtyards are curious. One, I wonder about the growing potential and the light character, but I'm not the landscape architect here. I will say perhaps it's a lost opportunity to further diminish the face presence of the blocks on the roadside as opposed to on the interior. So it might be worth understanding why you went this way instead of perhaps eroding the corners on the other side. And then lastly is to think about lighting, both in a positive way and also in how it may be disruptive to the neighbors across the street and the character of all these balconies and all these undersides of balconies that will have to be lit in some way. So those are the comments.
Thanks, Kirk. Laura?
I'm going to apologize if I repeat anything anyone else has said. I lost audio for a bit. The comments that I've heard have, I think, been spot on. And to build on what Kirk said about those courtyards, one of the tricky things about courtyards like this is the depth of them. It can be, because of the depth, it can be a little off-putting for people to want to go that deep into the building. And so I don't think that those step backs necessarily help the courtyards at all, or the experience. And to Kirk's point, you know, maybe that interior space can be moved to the cut back on the street side, so that there's a little more compassion about the rhythm of the building itself. The other thing is, you know, it's tricky building next to a giant parking lot like that. But nonetheless, thinking about the future, I wonder if there might be a at-grade connection between the two courtyards in the east and the west at the center of the building, or at least a way to see through the building to the landscape on the other side. I think it would help. I think it would help to sort of feel that the landscape is extended, and from either side, you're kind of borrowing one and the other. So I would look at that. I don't quite understand the west side and the walkway there, but we can look at that in the subcommittee meeting. But otherwise, I think that my colleagues have pretty much hit on everything I might say. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Laura. We don't have any other commissioner comments. Christina, could we move to public comment?
Yes, ma'am. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise their digital hand using the instructions presented on the screen. Please keep comments to 2 minutes. And though I do not see any hands raised at this time, I just want to acknowledge that BPDA staff did receive 2 comments today from constituents, and I'd like to read them into the record since we were not able to transmit them to the commissioners in a timely fashion. So Lizzie, if you would do me a favor and time me as I read 2 minutes of each of these letters into the record. Thanks. The first comment is from Tim McHale, resident of 102 Litchfield Street in Brighton. Per the Holton Street Corridor Study of 2008, the 2010 NASFP, and the current 2023 WACO-Z studies, Raymond Street was to be connected into the corridor as a means of weaving the fabric of the neighborhood together. The 30-acre corridor bisects the neighborhood in half. Relocate the driveway along the Spring Restaurant to the south till it aligns with Raymond Street. This will create a new parcel of land adjacent to Spring. This parcel could be built out as a separate building of 42 affordable units, preferably home ownership. Number 2, affordable housing proposed is not enough. Precedent is set in the neighborhood of 20% and 25% ratios. Affordable home ownership is virtually non-existent and could be integrated in the scenario offered above. Number 3, Brighton Mills is the neighborhood's best and only shopping district. With the advent of the mega development in our community, many amenities have disappeared. Restaurants, our diner, gas stations, hardware store, car wash, Kmart, clothing store, auto mechanics, mom and pop retail, all have vanished and nothing has replaced them. Brighton Mills needs to be refreshed and grown to accommodate the influx of thousands of new residents and employees. 250 Everett is a wonderful candidate to augment the shopping area by adding a retail block at the first floor elevation facing the Stars parking lot. A new retail strip here will bring locals to spend their dollars here and support local vendors. The building is a massive hulk towering over a residential area. The sheer walls of its exterior affront the pedestrian experience and shadow a once sunlit side of Everett Street where homes have enjoyed sunsets for 100 years. The scale of the building is way out of context with the surrounding residential neighborhood. The building should have step backs to bring it down to 3 or 4 stories along Everett Street. The setbacks are minimal and should mimic the setback of the abutting properties at least 25 feet. Also, thank you. And we have one other comment. Lizzie, if you will reset my clock here. I have a comment here from Audrey Seraphin. Dear Boston Civic Design Commission, we are writing to provide feedback on the proposed project at 250 Everett Street on behalf of the Allston community. While we are always excited to see much needed housing built in the neighborhood, we have several concerns we would like you to take into consideration as you review and vote on the project. Our first concern, and perhaps of most interest to this commission, is the design of the building itself. The design as proposed by Mill Creek is a huge mess in an area that could use more cohesion and connection. The design mimics what multiple buildings might look like on the block, but without the benefits of air and sunlight that is much needed by the abutters across the streets. We also worry that the facade materials will not live up to Wackersey's goals of beautiful architecture consistent with other projects in the area, which use sustainable materials of brick and stone. We are also extremely concerned about the building's setback or lack thereof on busy Everett Street. While we acknowledge that the 10-foot setback is recommended in the recently completed Wackersey, Everett Street is a busy street designed as a transition residential district in the recent Squares and Streets Planning Initiative. The abutting buildings of McNamara House, 80 units of elderly housing, and the Spring Shabu restaurant are set back over 25 feet from the sidewalk. The 250 Everett project will form a sheer wall of mass on the sidewalk that is out of sync with its neighboring properties. There is an opportunity to step the building several yards that we would like to see future designs incorporate. There have been several studies performed in our neighborhood that Mill Creek and BCDC should take into consideration when reviewing this proposal. The 2008 Community-Wide Plan, the 2010 North Allston Strategic Framework for Planning, and most recently the 2023 Western Avenue Corridor Rezoning Plan, Wackersey. They are all in concert with the goal for creating north-south and east-west connections through the Holton Street corridor, a 30-acre wedge that bisects our neighborhood. This can only be achieved by connecting the streets as development progresses. Raymond Street, which begins directly across the street from 250 Everett Street, is a prime example. Thank you. We will submit the letters in full to the commissioners for their consideration at future meetings, but I wanted to take the opportunity to share these public comments with you. And I'll turn it back to Commissioner.
Actually, Christina, looks like we might have one more public comment.
I'm
Yeah,
so
we have Moira has raised her hand, but thank you, Christina, for getting those circulated to us.
Moira, please go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Moira Crave. I'm from Allston Brighton City Councilor Liz Braden's office. I did just want to speak on behalf of the councilor and also in response to the letters submitted by constituents who have also we have heard similar concerns from constituents in the neighborhood. The councilor did want to emphasize the importance of Everett Street as a connector in the neighborhood. It's one of the few north-south connectors in the neighborhood and passes over the pike. Just any consideration of it is, as the constituents mentioned, it is a fairly busy street with lots of pedestrians and cars. Any consideration as the building goes through the design process of accommodating multimodal transportation and travel along this road would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I see no other hands raised at this time.
Thanks, Christina. Lots of comments that you've received tonight. I think, you know, this is a site that could really see some bold moves. It'll be a building in the round. You'll have, you know, 4 front door, at least 3 front doors that would have street frontage potentially in the future. So it's an exciting site. Commissioners, do we have a motion to send to subcommittee?
So moved.
Second.
Great, and we'll go ahead and go around. If you are in favor, please say aye. Laura Solano?
Aye.
Catherine Morris?
Aye.
Kirk Sykes?
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith?
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow?
Aye.
Kathy Kotaritas?
Aye.
And Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
Bill Ron?
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley, aye. We will see you in subcommittee. Thanks so much for the presentation today.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Take care.
And now we come to the end of our meeting. Thanks for your patience. I know we ran over tonight. I also wanted to recognize the anniversary 1 month of having Christina be part of our group. Thank you for all of the changes and support you've given us, Christina. We're looking forward to working more with you. And with that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a
Second.
second. Thanks. All in favor say aye. Lara Solano,
Aye.
Catherine Morris,
Aye.
Kirk Sykes,
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith,
Hi.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Aye.
Kathy Kotaritas,
Aye.
Jonathan Evans,
Aye.
Bill Ron,
Aye.
and myself, Linda Eastley. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night, everybody.
Well done.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you.